Here we are, early 2026, and the Democrats' Mamdani mistake is no longer a theory. It's a live problem they can't escape. For a while, Zohran Mamdani was the shiny new thing, the 33-year-old Democratic socialist who shocked the country by winning the New York City Democratic mayoral primary, toppling a scandal-scarred former governor, Andrew Cuomo, and stunning the party establishment that thought it still controlled the biggest city in America. He built his rise on affordability, on the anger of renters and working families who feel priced out of their own neighborhoods. He promised to freeze rents, expand city services, offer universal child care, fund it all by taxing the rich, and he wrapped it in the language of justice and transformation. On paper, it looked like a progressive fairy tale, the outsider who beat the old machine, the immigrant kid who could become the most left-wing mayor New York has seen in a century. But the story the national media is writing now is very different. It's about moderate Democrats in swing districts privately panicking, party leaders hedging and delaying endorsements, and consultants warning that what happened in New York could cost Democrats the House, the Senate, and maybe the future of their party brand. That is the Mamdani mistake, and this is why Democrats are now starting to turn on the man they once celebrated. To understand how they got trapped here, you have to start with that primary. For years, New York's Democratic establishment assumed that someone like Mamdani could never actually take over a citywide race. He was supposed to be a symbol on the left flank, useful energy, useful volunteers, but never the one holding the keys to City Hall. Then came 2025. Voters in one of the most expensive cities on earth were done being patient. They were angry about housing costs, childcare costs, transit costs, and they were willing to roll the dice on someone who promised to rip up the script. Mamdani ran a campaign that made the race about one thing: affordability. He linked every story, from rent to groceries to subway delays, to a simple narrative. The system is rigged for landlords, billionaires, and connected insiders, and the only answer is a mayor who will go to war with them. Meanwhile, Cuomo carried the baggage of his resignation amid sexual harassment allegations, years of bad blood with progressives, and a reputation as the walking embodiment of old-school machine politics. In that matchup, the energy was entirely on Mamdani's side. He turned huge crowds, viral clips, and relentless messaging into votes, and on primary night, the result wasn't close. Overnight, he became not just a local story, but a national symbol of the party's generational and ideological revolt. At first, some Democrats tried to spin this as a positive. Here was proof, they said, that you could win big by talking bluntly about rent, wages, and the cost of living. They pointed to his focus on economic pain and argued that this could be the future of the party's message. But behind closed doors, a very different conversation was already underway. Moderate Democrats, especially those representing suburban districts that flipped in recent cycles, looked at Mamdani's record, his self-identification as a socialist, his past support for defund the police, his controversial rhetoric on Israel and Palestine, and saw a neon-bright attack at being written for every swing race in the country. Politico, CNN, Axios, and others all reported the same basic reaction from the center-left and donor class. This could hurt our brand. This could hand Donald Trump and the Republicans a new weapon. This could undo years of careful work to convince moderates the party is not captured by the far left. You can see the panic in what Democrats actually did next. Some state-level leaders, like Governor Kathy Hochul and Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie, eventually endorsed Mamdani, but even they admitted they had frank conversations and disagreements with him over issues like policing, Israel, and taxes before coming on board. Their statements were filled with caveats. We don't agree on everything. We had concerns, but we're choosing unity. That is not how you talk about a candidate you're truly enthusiastic about. Meanwhile, some of the most powerful Democrats in the country, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, dragged their feet or withheld full-throated support for months, even as he stood as their own party's nominee in America's largest city. Gillibrand publicly criticized his rhetoric on Israel and then had to walk it back, apologizing for misrepresenting his record, a public stumble that underscored how radioactive his foreign policy positioning had become inside the caucus. Schumer and Jeffries kept their distance long enough that their silence itself became a national story. When top Democrats in Congress can't bring themselves to quickly and proudly back their own mayoral nominee at home, that tells you everything about how risky they think he is politically. At the same time, vulnerable House members from surrounding suburbs were sounding the alarm out loud. Tom Suozzi, a Democrat from Long Island, described Mamdani as a charismatic, smart, and effective campaigner, and in the next breath warned that Democrats must address the people's angst about the economy and affordability without embracing the socialism of Mr. Mamdani. Laura Gillen, another swing district Democrat from Long Island, went even further, calling him too extreme to lead New York City and absolutely wrong for New York, clearly terrified of being painted as a Mamdani ally in her own race. These are not Republicans talking. These are Democrats who share a party label with him, and they're already on record saying, in plain English, that he is a mistake for their state and a danger to their political survival. Republicans, of course, didn't need to be told twice. From the moment Mamdani clinched the primary, GOP strategists saw exactly what he represented, a made-for-TV example of everything they want voters to believe about Democrats: soft on crime, hostile to police, extreme on Israel, eager to raise taxes, and proud of the word socialist. Party operatives started talking openly about a Mamdani effect, building their midterm message around the idea that Democrats had allowed the far left to seize control of their biggest city and would do the same to the country if given the chance. Republican campaign arms rolled out digital ads in competitive House districts that didn't even feature the local Democrat, instead plastering Zohran Mamdani's face and tying him to anyone with a D next to their name. In some races, they branded centrists as the Mamdani of Maine or your local Mamdani, effectively turning him into a shorthand for every fear suburban swing voters have about the National Democratic Party. When Republicans can turn a New York City mayoral nominee into a recognizable label in House races hundreds or thousands of miles away, you know they've found something potent. It isn't just that Mamdani identifies as a democratic socialist, it's the specifics of his record and rhetoric that make him such a rich target. On policing, he aligned himself with the defund movement, calling the NYPD corrupt and racist, and cheering on imagery of a crying cop as nature healing in a widely criticized social media post. On foreign policy, he was slow to clearly distance himself from slogans like "globalize the intifada," a phrase that many Jewish voters and community leaders interpret as a call for violence against them worldwide. On economics, he pledges to freeze rents, provide free mass transit, and dramatically expand city services, all while hiking taxes on wealthy New Yorkers and businesses in a city that already bleeds high earners to lower tax states. On paper, these positions thrill his base. In practice, they hand Republicans a checklist of vulnerabilities they can hammer over and over again in mailers, TV ads, and debate attacks, not just against Mamdani, but against anyone in his party who doesn't run fast enough in the opposite direction. To his credit, Mamdani has tried to soften some of this as he moves from primary mode to governing mode. He has renounced his earlier calls to defund the police, promised to keep on a popular police commissioner from the Adams administration, apologized for some of his harshest past comments about officers, and made a point of saying Jewish New Yorkers will be safe under his leadership. He has also tried to nuance his tax plans, suggesting he would gladly use existing revenue streams if the state delivered them, instead of relying solely on new tax hikes to fund universal child care and other promises. Supporters argue that this shows growth, flexibility, and an understanding of the difference between being an activist and being a mayor. But to many Democrats watching from swing districts, this looks less like maturation and more like damage control. And they're not convinced his earlier record will be forgotten by the time the attack ads hit in 2026. That's the core of the Mamdani mistake. National Democrats let themselves get dazzled by energy and turnout and didn't think through what it would mean to have a self-proclaimed socialist, with a long trail of controversial statements, become the face of the party in its biggest media market at exactly the moment they need to win back moderate voters. After Trump's victory in 2024, the path back to power for Democrats runs through places like suburban Long Island, the outer boroughs, the the Midwest, and Sun Belt districts full of college-educated but risk-averse voters. Those voters may be frustrated with Republican chaos, but they are not asking for an ideological revolution on policing and foreign policy. They want stability, competence, and a sense that their party values public safety as well as justice. When they turn on the TV and see Republicans running footage of a New York City nominee who once flirted with defund the police and took ambiguous positions on incendiary protest chants, it makes the job of every Democrat on the ballot that much harder. Inside the party, you can feel the split hardening. Progressives look at Mamdani and see proof that their strategy works, talk directly about the cost of living, promise big structural changes, don't apologize for the word socialist, and you can beat better-funded establishment figures. They see his rallies, his small-dollar fundraising, the excitement of younger voters, and they say, this is the future. They argue that moderates have had their turn and failed, that triangulation and half measures don't inspire anyone, and that it's time to bet on candidates who actually believe in the policies they run on. But moderates and donors see something else. They see a candidate who, in one Politico account, has already racked up startlingly high unfavorables among likely New York City voters, and an even worse image among suburban New Yorkers, especially over his stances on Israel and policing. They read quotes from party strategists who compare him to other left-wing mayors whose approval ratings collapsed and who scared off the very voters Democrats need to win back in the next presidential cycle. To them, the Mamdani boom isn't a roadmap. It's a warning flare. The result is a kind of political contortion act. Some Democrats are trying to have it both ways, praising Mamdani's energy, vision, and focus on affordability in public, while privately telling reporters they hope he doesn't drag them down with him. Hochul's endorsement reads like a truce document, not a love letter. She talks about unity and shared priorities, but makes sure to note disagreements and to signal to business leaders and moderates that she hasn't gone full socialist herself. Schumer and Jeffries hold meetings with Mamdani, leak that the conversations were productive, and hint that an endorsement might come soon, always later, always after they've handled some other crisis first. Meanwhile, suburban Democrats like Gillen are openly using him as a foil, insisting that they are nothing like him and that his agenda is wrong for their voters. That gap between the party's official nominee for the biggest city in America and the way its own members talk about him is exactly what Republicans are exploiting. They don't have to convince voters that Mamdani is a problem. Democrats are doing that themselves. If you zoom out, Zohran Mamdani is less a one-off and more a symptom of a deeper identity crisis. The Democratic Party is trying to be two things at once. On one side, there's the movement that rallied around figures like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, younger, more diverse, more online, intensely focused on racial justice, climate, and structural inequality, deeply skeptical of police, corporations, and American foreign policy orthodoxy. On the other side, there's the coalition of union households, older Black voters, suburban professionals, and small business owners who say they want reform but not revolution, who worry about crime, who support Israel more strongly, and who don't see socialism as a selling point. Mamdani's primary victory forced those two halves into direct conflict in the most visible arena possible. Progressives cheered, moderates muttered about a Mamdani effect that could haunt them for years. And now, as Republicans methodically turn him into a national symbol of democratic extremism, that internal tug of war is starting to look less like a family debate and more like a liability voters can see with their own eyes. So why are Democrats turning on Zohran Mamdani now? Because they're finally realizing this isn't just a New York story, and it isn't just a feel-good narrative about breaking the mold. It's a test case with national consequences. It's one thing to flirt with a firebrand in a safe blue seat. It's another to hand him control of the most important city in the country and then ask swing district voters in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Arizona to trust that the party hasn't lost its mind. When you represent a suburban district that barely flipped blue, you don't have the luxury of ignoring how a candidate like Mamdani plays on Fox News or in GOP mailers. You don't have the luxury of pretending that his old tweets, his protest slogans, and his policy ambitions will stay in New York. Republicans have already made sure they won't. The Mamdani mistake is simple. Democrats thought they could ride his energy, harvest his turnout, and still control the narrative. they thought they could harness the lightning without getting burned. Instead, they handed Republicans a new caricature to weaponize, and they're now scrambling to convince voters and themselves that one man's ideology doesn't represent the entire party. That's why you see half-hearted endorsements, conspicuous silences, and on-the-record quotes calling him too extreme and wrong for New York from his supposed allies. That's why strategists talk about his candidacy in the same breath as their fears for 2026 and 2028. And that's why, as Trump and the GOP get giddy about the ads they can run tying every Democrat to Zohran Mamdani, more and more leaders in his own party are starting to whisper what they wouldn't say before. This might have been a very costly mistake.